welcome you today. We have a fantastic visitor, Piotr, who is currently a visitor at Berkeley and otherwise splits his time between Madrid and Warsaw to talk about Poland and the recent elections. And I'll be talking about Slovakia and the September 30th elections. And both of these talks are part of Democracy Day, which is a student-sponsored series of events surrounding the third annual Democracy Day celebrated tomorrow here at Stanford University. So as you can see from the title, I'll be talking about Slovakia. And in Slovakia, we had elections on September 30th. And the winner was Smer SD, which basically stands for direction, along with a smaller group of social democrats that joined the party. This was the winner of the elections with only 23% of the vote. It was a very fragmented electoral field. It's a left-wing and populist party that has its roots as an offshoot of the communist successor. It basically broke away from the communist successor party in 1999 and has always been led and under the direction of Robert Fico. And of course, this party joins the pantheon of other very sort of familiar populist figures in the region. Here's the Polish Law and Justice Party, which Piotr will be talking about, which just lost the Polish elections, which has been conservative and populist from the start and has governed in a majority single-party government in both 2015 and 2019. This is its leader, Jarosław Kaczyński. The crown on his head is entirely coincidental. And of course, perhaps most familiar, there's Fidesz, which is the party of young Democrats in Hungary that became a conservative populist party in the 1990s. It is led by Viktor Orban, and it's basically made steady gains in the 2000s. It basically first came into office in 2010 and has basically governed with an uninterrupted supermajority since then. Now, that of course raises the prospect of illiberal cooperation. PiS and Fidesz, the Polish and Hungarian populists, had very much openly collaborated and cooperated in the European Union and various fora. The war in Ukraine brought that to an end in many ways because Hungary basically opposes sanctions on Russia and very much is taking a pro-Russian stance, while Poland is very much pro-sanctions and pro-Ukraine. But this gives the opportunity for a new alliance between Fico on the one hand and Orban on the other, basically a way of Hungary of gaining and retaining an ally. Now, to give you a bit of a context for these elections, Smer is not a new party. As I said, it's been around since 1990, but it's also been a governing party. It's won the pluralities of the vote in 2010, 2012, 2016, and 2020. It's been in government twice before, actually with a similar coalition. It's had at least one coalition partner, SNS. And the 2023 results, although they are widely portrayed as sort of the victory of an illiberal populist, actually represent a loss of support for this party. Because Smer basically starts off with roughly 14% of the vote, climbs as high as 44%, and then precipitously drops. So already in 2020, it drops down to 28%. And these most recent elections actually represent sort of yet another steep drop in its sort of relative support in Slovakia. So this is very much not the case of some kind of a dominant illiberal populist streak within Slovak politics, or somehow a permanent legitimation of this particular way of doing politics. Now, the drop in support occurred largely because of events in 2018 and the murder of Jan Kuciak, who was a sort of young up-and-coming journalist who had investigated corruption and business dealings. And the business dealings were basically with Smer-affiliated businessmen who apparently took a hit on Kuciak and on his fiancée. What followed were enormous protests and a political crisis. Smer, the party, and Fico themselves were blamed as being party to and beneficiaries of this sort of corrupt way of business, this corrupt marriage between business and politics. And the government resigned on March 15th, 2018. Amid these widespread charges of collusion among businesses, organized crime, and politicians. There are huge protests, and as a result, already in 2019, we see a shift in Slovak politics with the election of Zuzana Čaputová, who is the president elected in 2019, who explicitly ran on an anti-populist platform who explicitly ran against the like of Fico and became one of the most highly trusted politicians in Slovakia. So what I think needs to be made clear here is that this is not a situation like Hungary or Poland of sort of a longer term populist entrenchment or a longer term erosion of democracy. Not only has Smer been losing popularity, but there are other political forces that really contest this way of doing politics in the country. So this is a much more fluid situation than what we see certainly in Hungary and even in Poland. Now, in the 2023 election, this was an election that was basically in many ways motivated or dominated by the crisis in Ukraine. Fico openly stated that he will not give a single bullet for Ukraine. He repeatedly said that he's willing to give some humanitarian aid, but no further military aid to Ukraine whatsoever. And in Slovakia, the public opinion polls, depending on whom you trusted, showed quite a bit of ambivalence around support for Ukraine among Slovaks. Of course, these are also the same public opinion polls that were so misleading that they showed the sort of loser of the elections in the lead up until the very last moment. There's a broader climate of anxiety, both around the ways in which the government handled COVID and around the economy amid sort of fears of greater inflation and a looming economic crisis that is in a sort of slower recovery by the EU from the COVID crisis. And so against this background, Smer gets 23% of the vote. It's joined in the coalition by Hlas, which is basically means voice, and it's just a breakaway faction that used to be part of Smer, and the sort of the Slovak Nationalist Party, which is very much a conservative right-wing formation. Together, these parties have 79 seats out of 150, so it's a pretty comfortable majority. They've governed together before. The SNS, which is the conservative sort of nationalist party, and Smer have governed before. And basically, they've already sort of apportioned ministries among them. But so in other words, this is a sort of very unusual coalition in that it combines, on the one hand, the left-wing sides of the political spectrum. This is Smer and Hlas, and on the other hand, the extreme right wing. So these are sort of odd bedfellows, but ones that have governed successfully before. Now, not everybody is happy about this. This is President Chaputova during the sort of official coalition invitation meeting. And this coalition is likely to have both a domestic and an international impact. On the domestic front, this is the return of a discredited populist. On the one hand, this is someone who was basically who had to resign because of the earlier corruption charges and the scandals surrounding the assassination. On the other hand, a full-throated autocracy is very unlikely. We're not going to see the Hungarian or even the Polish scenario be enacted in Slovakia. That's both because the party is in a coalition, and so it has to deal with coalition partners and can't simply get its way, and because of this prior precedent when the party was in power. It certainly has some very unsavory business dealings, but it didn't go on a full-out course of eroding democracy the way that some of its counterparts have. So I think the most we're likely to see is a return to these kind of collusive, corrupt, crony politics that we saw during Smer's prior periods of governance. But we're not going to see a full-fledged erosion of democracy or some kind of an authoritarian takeover of politics. When it comes to the international impact, the sort of two major platforms that Fico and Smer have advocated were, on the one hand, independence and autonomy from the EU, and on the other hand, a concern with immigration and sort of the immigrants flooding a very small country. But those are concerns that are shared by many other politicians in the EU. It doesn't make Slovakia particularly unique. When it comes to Ukraine, yes, it's absolutely the case that Slovakia has now shifted its official stance, but it doesn't have that much more military aid to give. It's given huge tranches of military aid before Fico came to power. So it's not as if there could be a massive new wave of military support now anyway. And frankly, East Central Europe is not united on Ukraine to begin with. There are a lot of splits both within countries and among them. So this simply shifts the balance slightly without fundamentally altering what's going to happen. But I think the biggest significance is that this basically means that Hungary has gained a new best friend. Because as Piotr will talk about, the Polish peace is now out of power. And so Slovakia becomes de facto the biggest ally that the autocratic government has and Hungary has both in the EU and otherwise. And with that, we'll turn to Poland and Piotr.
right, perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. And I'm going to talk about Polish elections, which took place on October 15th. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background, so the democratic backsliding that occurred under the rule of PiS, of Law and Justice Party, since 2015. Then I'm going to comment on the results of the elections, and then I'm going to talk about broader implications, raising some questions on what can we learn from the Polish case. So to start with, during the last 8 years, Poland has entered the path of democratic erosion and the clear democratic backsliding, decline. All of the international scholars and institutions have talked about it. Also, your own Larry Diamond here. If you think about the 12 steps of true autocratic program, Poland under PiS, actually, maybe 10 out of these 12 were fully put in place under Law and Justice government. But I'm not going to focus on the erosion of rule of law or of the subjugation of constitutional court and so on. You also, this is not something so particular to Poland. You here in the United States also have problems with it, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. But I just wanted to focus on some parts that were not that much maybe covered and which are relevant for these elections and their results. So one thing is that the human rights were also attacked during these 8 years. Most in a greater way for women and for LGBT communities. So there was a restriction of abortion law, already very restrictive in Poland, and which sparked massive protests, and mainly of women, but not only. Regarding the LGBTQ plus community, there were so-called LGBT free zones, in famous ones, in parts of southeastern, actually, parts of Poland. Another dimension of this erosion is also regards the civil rights, so freedom of speech. On the left here, you have an example of an art piece of artwork in which the Virgin Mary of Częstochowa, so the most important one in Poland, is surrounded with a rainbow. From, of course, the meaning is clear here. The artist was actually arrested and prosecuted for that. So there is a tension between freedom of religion and or religious offense, let's say, and artistic expression, which is important. And the other part is on civil society, not civil rights. And so this is not only that the erosion of democracy came from top-down perspective, but also it was bottom-up process through social movements, for state-supported social movements, non-contentious social movements. So this is something new. So pillarized civil society and kind of uncivil society, like Grzegorz argued. This is important also. And PiS, Law and Justice, is clearly also a populist party, populist radical right party. And we know that populism is this thin-centered ideology, which in this case become pretty thick. So that it was symbolic thickening, in which involving in nationalism, nativism, really strong ideological stances, as you can see here. These are the photos from the Independence March. So this is in 1 week. It will on November 11th. Every year there is since the PiS came to power, there was a big march of nationalists and international. So the neo-Nazis from Italy were coming and so on. And the theme was our civilization, our rules, and we destroy the communist gay Europe, let's say. Okay, so going to the elections, in the run-up of the elections, we can say, just like 2019 contest 4 years ago, we can clearly say that these were free elections, but not entirely fair, let's say. And this is because of many reasons. So some of them are related to the instrumental use of state-owned enterprises. For instance, Orlen, the Polish oil company, national oil company, what they did is lower the prices just before the elections. as the national bank, the National Federal Reserve in Poland also lowered the interest rates just before the elections. And also, we can talk about it in the Q&A, but the role of the media and of subjugation of public TV and strong propaganda, it became a mouthpiece basically for the party, portraying the opposition as not only delegitimizing them, but demonizing them as agents of Russia and of Germany and so on. There was also some electoral law engineering, maybe not so much as in Hungary, but there were small changes like opening more polling stations in the countryside, which is clearly votes for the ruling party. And there were also pork barrel politics in the sense of distributing EU structural funds towards those localities in which the government is in power. Also promises of increased social transfers, that this is something also relevant for explaining why Poles still support peace in high rates. But this was this idea that we're going to give more money, and if the opposition wins, they're going to take all of it away. And importantly, also the referendum, which was tied together with the elections themselves, it was basically the wording of the questions was questionable, to say the least, and it was mainly done to mobilize their constituency or the government's constituency, and also to have unconstrained finances for the campaign, because the parties in Poland, like in most of Europe, are publicly financed, and they have a limit on public spending. This allowed the ruling party to just overcome it. Okay, going to the results. So we have 2019 and 2023. You can see that Law and Justice, peace, still is a winner of the elections, but it's not going to govern, most probably. But still, it lost some votes. It's 35.4. And the second, it's a civic coalition, so a liberal right-wing party, leader by Donald Tusk. It gained some, but not that much, let's say. And probably the most surprising result, let's say, was the third comer. So Third Way, this is a coalition between a peasant traditional party, always present in Polish parliament, and a kind of a new, also right-wing conservative Catholic party, which was, according to the polls, it was not sure whether it will pass the threshold or not. And after all, it passed it with a big margin of 14%. And the New Left, it lost some votes. Confederation, which was inflated in the polls, so this is the radical far right party. After all, similar result to 2019. And this translated into this composition of this lower house, so same. There's a clear majority of 17 or 18 MPs from the three opposition parties. So the New Left from the left, then the Civic Coalition, and Third Way altogether. Thinking in absolute numbers to see how the shifts in vote occurred. So Law and Justice lost 350,000 or so. Civic Coalition gained a lot, so over 1.5 million. Right? And Third Way, also the 2019 result is only for PSL, only for the Peasant Party, also has doubled their votes, right? And Left lost some, Confederation did win, but not really translated into more mandates. Seeing the flaws, the volatility of the vote, this is just, a lot of things going on, but just a couple of issues. So one, PiS did not lose really their voters to other parties. So the retaining factor for PiS is the highest among all Polish parties. And another thing is that those who didn't vote, most of them in 2019, in 2023, most of them went to the Democratic opposition, most of them went to the Civic Coalition of Donald Tusk. So this is something to keep in mind because, and this is probably the most important characteristic, the turnout was the highest, and it's a record-breaking record in Poland. Poland is a very, like the United States, it's a very low turnout country. Even it was 74.4, so it is even higher than the first semi-free democratic elections of 89, 62, and there is a clear mobilization. Last time it was 61.7, now it's 74. So thinking about who did come to the polls this time and didn't last time. So there are clear differences by age. If you look at the youngest group, 18-29, it was 46 in 2019. This time it was 70%. But so this is, yeah, okay, this is maybe understandable. I think that this part, so why did 59-year-olds did not turn out that much last time in 2019? Were they not bothered by the democratic erosion in 2019? So what happened? This is something that we still don't know, and probably we will need to answer this. This is exit polls. So exit polls in Poland did well, not like in Slovakia. And the other story is the gender story. So there was the talk that women, because of the abortion restriction and because of the socialization into mobilized context, they will turn out more. It is true, but not that much. They did already in 2019. So it's not that women voted out peace, right? It's men also voted in higher degrees this time. Okay, and well, regarding the vote choice, there is a clear age cleavage. Okay, so the older polls do still support peace, and as we get young, the support for the third, fourth, and fifth party, so the third way, left, and radical right becomes high, and civic coalition is actually more or less 30% among all groups. Okay, so just final thoughts about the implications, what's ahead of the new Polish government, where there will be problems of governability, just like in Slovakia. But there is kind of another additional issue that this government has to prove that liberal democracy can solve problems better than the liberals, or at least not worse, right? And both ideological differences between these parties, which go from radical left to conservative Catholic peasant party, they will be, of course, they will hinder any chances of governing, effectively. For sure, there will be tensions, and also, and more importantly, the veto power of President Duda, appointed by peace, and which just an hour ago announced that he will give the first chance to form a government to Mateusz Morawiecki, so the prime minister from Law and Justice, although it is clear that he doesn't have a majority. Well, another issue is the accountability, not the accountability of the new government, but the accountability of the old government. It should be, criminal acts or unconstitutional acts should be brought to justice. After restoring the independence of the judiciary, which will be difficult to do through democratic means, and even not in any way, it will be difficult to do. And the responsiveness, inclusiveness. So half of the elderly, the countryside or workers who support the peace, 2/3 of farmers are those with basic education. And there is something, the polarization here, of course, we also talk about it, but in Poland, it is very clear that it is very strong. So these supporters of the liberal side must be, or should be, brought to the liberal project. So for EU and Ukraine, what are the international implications? So Poland is back in the EU. Everybody's happy. It will be the fifth largest player after after Brexit. It was marginalized, but it will become core, mostly because most probably Tusk will be the prime minister, and he used to be the president of the EU Council, and he knows his way in Brussels. The Franco-German-Polish cooperation will be restored. The resilience and structural funds will be unfrozen. They were frozen due to quarrels over rule of law. And like Anna said already, the democratic backsliding alliance between Hungary and Poland will be broken, but the new friend will be Fico. Regarding Ukraine, so the Polish response, both of the society and the government, was one of the great things that happened recently. You've probably heard about Poles welcoming over a million of refugees, but during the campaign, this was thrown out a bit because peace changed their discourse to a more incendiary one, mostly because of the far-right party Confederation speaking up against Ukrainians in the nativist stances, and there was conflict over grain. But this is what the bottom line is, that after elections there will be renewed support for Ukraine. Okay, this is final slide. So like kind of thinking about broader implications. So what strategy works best for resisting or reversing autocratization, right? What can be learned from the Polish case? Is it that the opposition parties should go united or fragmented in the run? in the election. So Polish case goes more into the line of fragmented. Of course, it depends on the electoral rules, on the electoral formula, and so on. But what Polish case compared to Turkey and to Hungary, in which there was one list and did not, the democratic opposition did not win this election, it goes in the fragmented but cooperating and caring about each other. Let's say this is the one lesson. Resorting to illiberal tactics or sticking to democratic procedures, this is both for the democratic opposition role and for the governing after winning these elections. Of course, this is always sticking to the democratic procedures. There's a new book by Laura Gomboa which explains it very well. And this will be difficult to restore the rule of law through democratic procedures, like I said. So this is another issue is kind of like related to this transitional justice literature, thinking about how to hold the liberal incumbents accountable, but with being inclusive and not, you know, not leaving them aside of the new project of including them in the liberal democratic project. What is the role of supranational institutions? So there was a lot of talk about EU being toothless and not being forceful enough in defending rule of law in Poland and in Hungary. And we see, well, it is not clear whether this would work. We'll see what happens in Hungary. But it is not entirely clear because Polish elections show that maybe it was not such a bad strategy not to intervene more. This is an open question. And finally, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for this reverse of autocratization? So of course, free elections, independent media, which is the clear difference between Poland and Hungary, and this idea about whether to persuade moderate supporters of the liberals or to rather to mobilize the liberal democratic voters. So what Polish examples clearly shows is that it's mobilizing the liberal democratic votes. It's not about persuasion of supporters of liberalism. And Poland did become mobilized during the last years. This is one of the big marches that happened in Warsaw. Thank you so much.
We'll now open up to Q&A. If anyone has any questions. Okay, I'll give it to Christoph.
Yeah, I just have one question for both of you, sort of linking the two cases. So basically, to some extent, what happened in Poland this year is what happened in Slovakia 3 years ago or so, that a populist government leader was pushed out of power. So then basically, I have two sort of sub-questions to that. What went wrong in Slovakia, and can we say anything about what will happen in Poland? Will Poland do better, or will the government fall apart relatively quickly in Poland as well?
Okay, so well, I think although there are clear differences, ideological differences, let's say, if we think about abortion, Razem, which is a far left party, is advocating for total liberalization. And the other part, the most right-wing part of the future coalition, is advocating for a referendum, so which would probably be lost in Poland. Of course, this is something that divides the opposition, and this will make the government maybe unstable. But the axis of competition in Poland is so strongly polarized that I think that the erosion of democracy and the peace democratic on the one side and democratic opposition camp on the other side, it's not a cleavage, but it's a very strong divide, which I hope so will make the government think, you know, twice before doing making some decision that will probably, you know, put the stability of the government to threat. So I think that there is a kind of like a glue that is stronger than in Slovakia, I would say. I don't know if you agree.
So that, you know, Slovak governments have been surprisingly robust, despite having 3, sometimes 4 parties. They survived through the next election much better than the Polish ones were in the 1990s. There was a new government every other day. So much of this depends on what their alternatives are, right? And I don't think there's much alternative for Sverige right now other than to stay in a strong coalition. I think the bigger point I would make is that in both countries, there isn't widespread support for autocracy or anything like that, right? We're talking about 30% of the vote in Poland, 23% of the vote in Slovakia. These are relative, these are minorities. And so this is much more to do with proportional representation and with the sort of, the translation of votes into seats than it does with any kind of, and deeply felt popular autocratic backsliding, like that.
I'm Claude one from the community. There is a substantial risk that PiS could come back to power in the upcoming election. And so my question is, assuming that Donald Tusk will be named prime minister, do you think he'll be up to a task to prevent that from happening? And what are the type of measures he could take? Will he have a power, for instance, to fire many of the judges that were named by PiS, who are highly conservative and share the same ideology? What can he really do about the media? What can he do in general to make sure that it never happens again? Because if PiS takes power again, having lost an election, they'll be even more ruthless.
Well, they already did lost an election. Kaczynski, actually, his arch enemy is just because he lost a lot of elections to him before. So, like I said, it won't be easy to do, and it will be even harder to do through democratic means. But I think that there is this, although there are some voices even from the judiciary of restoring the order through undemocratic means to start over. But I think that the right way is to do it through democratic means. So it's not firing all the judges, but let's say, I don't know, appointing an independent body who will, I don't know, it's not clear how it will be done, but it should be done according to the law. So there are presidential elections coming in 2 years, and it will be probably easier. And we have elections, actually local elections, next year. So depending on the political landscape and the changes there, it will be probably easier for civic platform and its allies to implement these changes which are relevant. Media, there is talk about just closing the public media. I'm not sure whether this will happen. So there are already some moves of the journalists. They suddenly changed their discourse from being a mouthpiece of the government to saying, oh, we're in favor of democracy. We're here to help, right? I think that there is a strong, also, there is a strong legitimization of this government. It's over 11 million people that voted for this government. This is higher than President Duda. It's over 10 million. So there is a strong legitimization from the society, and I think that there's a clear will to restore rule of law and democracy in Poland right now. What will happen in 4 years? We'll see. But let's hope for the best.
Oh, sure. So thanks. Very interesting. I was going to ask, so Anna, you said that you didn't think that this was so much to worry about in terms of an autocratic future in Slovakia, and it's largely this is a product of a proportional representation kind of amplifying the support personnel. But I had recently in my office, and maybe you did too, somebody who came through the Eisenhower Fellowship, was a member of Parliament, who is afraid to go back to Slovakia. He lost his seat and is going to set up an NGO outside Slovakia. He's pretty sure that people like him are going to go to jail because rule of law is going to break down. So is he exaggerating? It definitely seemed, I mean, obviously not a member of that party stand, but exaggerating. So not that scary.
I think Fico is definitely going to engage in a lot of corrupt business practices. He's definitely going to do what both Orban and Kaczynski did with regards to EU funding and funneling into various bodies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no question that I think we'll have the return of corrupt politics. But 5 years ago, when that journalist and his fiancée were assassinated, that provoked such protests that he had to resign. His entire government resigned. That's not something that Orban or Kaczynski would have, right? I mean, they would have just, I think, kept on going with, a dismissal of the concerns, etc. So, God only knows, maybe, Fico is now going to entrench himself in order to preserve his power. But at least based on precedent, there'll be a lot of corruption, not necessarily out of democratic backside.
Thank you. I was wondering, to what extent do you think in both countries the shift in discourse towards Ukraine from pro-Ukraine stance to anti-Ukraine stance in Slovakia helped win the elections for Fico, and in Poland led to the losing of the election like this?
So I don't think, I mean, it was just rhetoric. So we heard President Duda speaking in the United Nations Assembly, not very affectionate words, let's say. But I think it was just kind of domestic issue of competition with confederation. So to judge whether this have helped or not really, because confederation did have had the same results than 4 years ago, and peace didn't lose any voters to confederation. They might have. So it's a hypothesis, but I don't think that this changed the results of the elections. That's quite clear.
I don't think so. I mean, it's the same in Slovakia, right? Again, Fico back in, after 2014 was more than happy to aid Ukraine, and he continues to be more than happy to aid Ukraine with humanitarian aid. Since Slovakia last year basically gave most of its military arsenal to Ukraine, there wasn't that much to give anyway. I think in both cases, this is much more to do with domestic constituencies being sort of paid off verbally than anything else. I mean, in Poland, the big thing that happened was that Ukraine basically started selling grain in Poland, which it had every right to, 2 weeks before the election, right? And had it just waited until October 16th, there would be no wobble by peace. Peace would have been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine, but it jumped the gun. It's, as another Eisenhower representative told me, Ukraine is very hard to negotiate with. So it basically saw its opportunity and took it, and that had that effect in Poland. In Slovakia, I don't think this is a significant change as far as either sort of support for Ukraine within Slovakia is concerned, or government policy.
I have a question about best friend of Fidesz, of Orban. Traditionally, the issue between Hungary and Slovakia was Hungarian minority in Slovakia. What happened to that issue, and how does Fico position himself with regard to that issue, and how did this minority vote in Slovakian election?
That traditionally was much more of an issue in the 1990s, when there was a very sort of lively Hungarian minority party, and when there was a lot of attention paid to how loyal are there as Slovaks. And at that point, Mečiar, who was the main sort of populist then, would repeatedly demonize the Hungarian minority and make a huge deal about the fact that they all live in one area, et cetera, et cetera. What basically happened was an electoral reform that kind of split where they vote, and so it sort of diffused their electoral support. It's not nearly the issue that it was before. At least from my reading, it hasn't been brought up at all in these elections as the kind of issue that Mečiar would consistently refer to. So it's simply not that much of an issue. I think minorities abroad have been obviously very controversial for Hungary, given that the Hungarian government has been issuing passports illegally to Hungarians living outside of Hungary itself. But that's less of, that's not very much an issue between Slovakia and Hungary either.
Paula Ganga, visiting fellow. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think both of you in some way have mentioned the fact that, illiberal populist political parties will implement policies that are a little bit more special. You mentioned that for Slovakia, we will expect to have much more return to collusive, corrupt policies. And for a piece, you mentioned how during the campaign, they used their reach to make sure that Orlen lowered gas prices and that the Central Bank of Poland would lower interest rates to help the parties. Well, we have different expectations of democratic parties. My question is, as we, things in Poland, for example, settle down in terms of the population feeling like democracy is under threat, but then citizens start asking for good, well-performing economic policies. What do you think the government might be able to do when they aren't able to, or maybe aren't as willing to use these kinds of policies as peace did? What do you think the coalition, hopefully if they get to govern, what would they implement to keep the population happy with how the country is going?
Yeah, that's a good question. So inflation is very high. Still, it was one of the highest in Europe, and it's still very high, double digits. So the president of the board of the National Central Bank is appointed. He has been recently reappointed. It's a peace nominee, clearly a friend of Kaczynski, and he will do everything in his power to to not allow this government to succeed in economic policies. So it is tough, and like I said, we can do undemocratic moves of just changing or just not following the constitution and just throwing him out. Probably not the best idea, and the alternative is to try to convince or try to there. I think that a part of the president of the board, there are other members of the board who maybe will change their idea of running economic policy in a more reliable way, let's say. Let's hope that this will occur.
Thank you.
I would just add that the opposition, the Democratic opposition, has been much less complacent than it used to be, right? So when Tusk was running in 2015, an election he lost, he was offering, and I quote, the politics of warm water, right? It was just, come on, you're safe with us. Do you really need us to answer your grievances and give you policy alternatives? This time around, they're very clear to articulate 100 different policy proposals for all kinds of economic and political issues. They're very clear to go and campaign and actually speak to the electorate. And so I think their communications capacity has changed, and that may be useful when they're trying to explain that the national bank president is artificially either lowering or raising the interest rate in ways that make it very difficult for us to help you, the average.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Airdas. I'm a Lithuanian from the College of Europe, and I had a question about a little bit broader implications for the EU democracy. So what do you think this election outcome would mean for the debate on EU institutional reform and maybe unanimity voting or EU budget increase, both for Poland and Slovakia? And also another little question about the perception of democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, because the democracies of Central and Eastern Europe had this perception of fatality of liberalism. And I wanted to ask if there's now a hope after this election in Poland and also election in Slovakia, which had kind of still not that big win of populists. Will that give some hope for a change of perception in the West about
Okay, so about the EU, well, it should be said that both governing parties, so the Glass and Smer, were thrown out of the socialist Eurogroup before the elections because they announced that they will form a coalition with SNS. So they are outsiders like Orban and Fidesz, and it is still we still have to see whether there is some kind of there's a lot of talk after 2019 elections that there is this populist movement, far right movement, and they will probably form a coalition. But one of the issues that divides them was Russia, and this was an important divide, which is still present, right? So I think that there is no fear of far right forming a coalition in or populists, not even far right, because Smer, is it left really? I'm not that sure. So this is something that there is no really change. What's changed is that the ECR, so the one of the right wing groups, lost a strong voice in which is Morawiecki and Law and Justice in the council. Right now it will be Tusk. So this is a clear change. The problem is the Article 7, and will it be finally applied to Hungary or not? Probably not, because of Fico, or of Meloni. Also, we have to remember that Italy has this kind of government too, right? So I'm not sure whether this is like kind of a big shift in Europe. What there is like kind of a relief that one of the biggest players, one of the, let's say, one of the open fronts on the battle between the liberal and liberal democracy has been shut down, at least for 4 years.
I also, there was a lot of talk when the war in Ukraine began about East Central Europe now assuming a greater position and the center of power shifting to the east, and none of that happened. And the main reason why it didn't happen was the sort of, unbelievably sort of belligerent policies of the Polish peace government, right? Where Kaczynski and Morawiecki still operated in categories of, the 1950s and kept picking stupid fights with Germany, like, insisting on $1.3 trillion in reparations, just as the war is taking off, which is, inane. The continuous of insults, the continuous sort of belittling of Germany, calling German opposition politicians flunkies, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen two effects of this. One is that, so a younger generation of Poles finds this illegible, right? For them, Germany should be an ally, not someone that you poke, continually poke. And two, more importantly, it's meant that Poland had foregone the chance to really kind of shift that center of gravity east. I don't know if Poland under Tusk can make that up, but it certainly won't be compounding the damage by kind of sort of insisting on, rather than building alliances, insulting your would-be friends. Standards are low.
Thank you.
So can I ask another question? So Anna, you've written obviously a lot on populism. Do you now have some hope that Poland demonstrates, this is both of you, that perhaps the populism from here 5, 6, 7 years ago is not the problem that it was?
I would say that I think the yes and no. So no, it's not the problem it was, at least in Poland, because it's clear that can be defeated. But it hasn't been defeated in Hungary. It hasn't, been defeated in many other places. So on one hand, yes, things had not gone so far in Poland that democracy still prevailed and the populace could be voted out of power. But I think what has changed is kind of the Overton window of what is considered normal political dialogue, and that has definitely shifted across Europe, right? And it's not just Poland or Hungary; it's Meloni, it's Salvini, it's a whole bunch of other politicians, Le Pen, who have shifted how we talk about politics in Europe. And that sort of, the populist discourse, I think, is here to stay, mostly because the mainstream political parties have not really reasserted themselves, and they haven't really shown themselves to be particularly capable of speaking to voters and being accountable to them.
Yeah, and adding to that, I think that even the concept of democracy did change. If you think about, how Hungarians are more satisfied with democracy today than they were 10 years ago, right?
And for Hungarians to be satisfied with anything, it's kind of
So I think that it's kind of a broad change. Not maybe, and we should distinguish between illiberalism, populism, and authoritarianism, which is not that easy to do, but we should. And thinking about what political scientists do, populism used to be, there was to be big hype of studies of populism. Right now, it's affected polarization. Is the thing, right? Not populism. So just thinking about what we do, probably populism will become less of an issue, I would say, than others.
What was the degree of Russian interference, if any, in the two elections?
Well, there was some talk or some conspiracy theory also in Poland about the Russian agents being, involved at the top levels of the government, and this is a complex issue to we don't know really, right? So and there are no official reports, I think, of mingling, of even of online or bots or so whatsoever. It wasn't really an issue, but there is some kind of a tension in anti-Russian or Russophobic even discourse of peace and their resemblance of Putin's moves, right, and Putin's actions. So being completely anti-Russian, which in Polish you probably have to be like that to be a prime minister, maybe, let's say, or these are it's a clear enemy, even clearer now after the war, right? But I you know. Some of the policies implemented mirrored what Putin did in Russia. So, but I'm not that sure that there is that much of interference. Rather, similar aligned interests, let's say, or aligned not even interests but ideological stances between both governments rather than interference.
I think there are places where there is direct interference. Moldova has certainly seen massive pressure from Russia. But for the most part, I think a lot of this has to do with sort of material benefits that both politicians and political parties benefit from the relationship to Russia. And in Poland, there's very little of this. In Slovakia, both Fico and some of his business coterie have benefited from kinds of sweetheart deals with Russia. And Russia certainly has, it's more than happy to try to buy politicians when it can, right? Salvini, Le Pen, all of those were basically, the FPÖ in Austria. Those are also, a lot of subsidiaries.
Hello, this is Leo. I'm a visiting scholar at Hoover this year, and coming from a Chinese liberal background, I think one thing we really admire about Poland is that the Polish democracy is relatively prosperous and flourishing post-communism, and so there's a lot of interest in the post-communist transition in Poland from the Chinese liberal community. Now, my question would be, well, one of the understandings of why Poland transitioned to democracy was that they had a Catholic Church, a military, the Solidarity Movement, Gorbachev, Thatcher, Reagan. Do you see those factors, the factors that got Poland into democracy in the first place, do you see those factors continuing to play a role in the consolidation of democracy? And from this election as well, do those institutions continue to strengthen Polish democracy, or do you think they no longer play a role, maybe even weaken it?
I'm the older one, so I can speak. I think in different forms, yes, right? So I think it's a supply and demand story, or a story of necessary and sufficient conditions. It is very much the case that Poland needed a favorable international environment in order to even consider democracy, right? The same Soviet Union that was all too happy to threaten sending in tanks in '81 had basically let these countries go in '87 under the auspices of the Sinatra Doctrine, told them that they have to take care of their own problems, and that opened up the space, right? That was an enabling condition for sort of democratic movements within countries to sort of unfold. And there, I think it may have been the Catholic Church back in the 1980s. It's certainly not the Catholic Church now, but civil society itself that really pushes for democracy and preserves it. And what we saw, here, this sort of the kind of amazing turnout shift that Piotr was talking about is precisely the mobilization of democratic citizens on behalf of democracy. They may have been sort of helped in doing that in the 1980s by the church. Now they're helped in doing that by political parties that can actually reach out to voters. So I think yes, you need the favorable international environment, but unless you have sort of domestic forces and a domestic citizenry that is really willing to push for democracy, it will neither arise nor consolidate.
And just adding to that on the role of Catholic Church, Anna brought a lot about that. But Poland is right now the fastest secularizing country in the world. Of course, this is a big horse to fall off because almost all Poles are Catholics, or at least identify as Catholics, and this kind of Polish national identity is very closely tied to the Catholic identity. But it is true that what peace made, I don't know if not willingly probably did, is increase the pace of secularization in Poland. We've seen the protest, for instance, going into churches for the first time and protesting in the church. This is something that we didn't see before. And among the youth, although there are worrisome signs of also high support for the radical extreme right, but basically young Poles become more liberal, even leftist, according to some studies, and for sure less involved in religious activities.
I think the Dobbs decision in the United States and the Polish Constitutional Court ruling both did a lot to discredit those actors who pushed for it. And it's in much the same way. We have a question from the internet about the risks of the presidential veto for basically the coalition politics and coalition attempts to.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, sure. There's a clear risk of veto. Thinking just what decision the President Duda made today. It will be and he has announced that he will defend what changes were implemented under Law and Justice. So he will for sure use veto. It depends a bit on what he's planning to do after his finishing his second term. So whether he wants to focus on an international career or domestic one. If it's a domestic career, most probably he will veto more of or all even laws if he wishes to. Because it involves a career in the law and justice structures, and Mr. Kaczynski is 74 or 73, so he's probably not going to be there forever. And if it's the international career for President Duda, most probably he will try to be kind of more favorable to the government, or at least less unfavorable, I would say.
Program. I have a question about the Smer coalition with the far-right party. How does that work on a cultural, political level? Do they just agree to stay away from the cultural hot topics, or is there some sort of devil's bargain that they made there?
Sure. So the SNS, both at least to go by precedent, since they've governed before, they don't particularly care about these hot button issues like abortion or divorce or religion in schools. They're simply not the issue they are in Poland. So it's not about policy issues as much as it is about a kind of a nationalist stance on policy. For example, the SNS, I believe, just got the foreign ministry, so they'll be able to articulate that. So it's about nationalism. It's about immigration. I think this is where both parties agree that they want to control immigration. And frankly, it's also about the kind of sweetheart deals that they can conclude on the side, much more than it is about some kind of a reconciliation of radically different policy preferences. More questions.
I have two very quick questions, just based on the results in Poland. One of the things that you showed was the the division of the votes by age brackets. My question there is, can we hope that as time passes, we will just see more liberal voters? That's one. And the other is, do you think that, what was the other point? It will come to me later. I will ask you first.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the demographics are on the liberal side in this case, for sure. It's also a kind of modernization story about people also gaining more education and not only dying, but also gaining more education, let's say. And if we think about it, also COVID might have actually played a role, because Poland has had one of the highest
700,000 missing voters.
Yeah. But the government didn't care, so they didn't see an issue that much at the time. In Poland, nobody wore masks. It was not an issue.
On that, either extremely optimistic or very thank you for coming out.